Flight controller is gonna go for landing. Retro. Go. I don't go. Go. GNC. Go. Econ. Go. Control. Go.
Ninth Planet Audio.
Capcom, we're go for landing. You're go for landing, over.
In starting my journey to change the BCHS mascot, I figured I should go right to the source and reach out directly to the school.
And then you got in touch with the school board.
Yes. So I couldn't wait. I sent them an email to the head of the school board, and I can just read it.
Yeah.
I said, "Hello, Ms. Bird. I'm Akilah Hughes, a writer, comedian, and podcast host who was, fun fact, the first student representative to the Board of Education in Kentucky history. I graduated from Boone County High School in 2005. I'm writing you because I'm doing a podcast about schools in the South and Florence's very cool history. We also want to talk about biscuits. I'm having trouble finding updated contact information for anyone at BCHS who can help, and unfortunately Mrs. Black, the principal, and also my former fine arts teacher, hasn't been able to assist us. Is there a time that would be good to visit the board?" I even had an in with the principal, Stacy Black, who used to be one of my teachers back in the early aughts, so surely she'd be willing to talk with me and realize that this is a change the school desperately needed, right? Maybe the podcast ends here, and all I have to do is make her aware of the racist mascot, and she'll be a leader and make the change. Listener, I was so wrong. Long story short, all of my attempts to connect and speak with someone who actually worked at BCHS or someone on the school board, literally anyone involved in education at all, were pushed off to a woman named Barbara Brady, the Schools and Community Relations Coordinator, basically the PR woman for the school district. And so, Barbara has un-CC'd everyone and essentially is just like, "Have you seen the movie?"
You gotta read the whole
I gotta read it.
It's so good.
She says, "Hello, Akilah. Our school board president, Karen Bird, has referred this matter to me. As far as the name Rebels goes, the mascot image was removed long ago." Reader, that was 6 years ago. Long ago. The school is going to be 70 years old, so, relativity. But in any case, long ago. As you know, the Rebels nickname remains. The nickname was chosen by the first graduating class of Boone County High School, taken from the popular 1955 movie Rebel Without a Cause. I don't know if you've seen the movie. It's worth watching. It's a coming-of-age movie about emotionally confused middle-class teens. There are more than 100 high schools across the country with the nickname Rebels, many of whom also took the name from the movie at that time. Half of them are high schools in the North. So, if you're like, Rebel Without a Cause, like the James Dean movie, did I hear that right?
You're tearing me apart!
What?
You say one thing, he says another, and everybody changes back again!
Akilah, didn't you say in the first episode there was an actual mascot who was unmistakably a Confederate general in a light blue uniform, feathered cap, and enormous mustache? Yeah, I sure did. But don't worry, we're definitely going to get into why someone would bring up 50s heartthrobs in an email about Civil War mascots. But the point is that this email was clearly sent to discourage further action and to get me to, essentially, kick rocks. Not only was this message not going to discourage us, we were already on our way to Florence. We knew that we needed to have our feet on the ground to build a coalition of allies and show Miss Brady, along with BCHS and the school board, that I'm not going anywhere. So fueled by an unrelenting determination and desire to eat Skyline chili, I arrived in Florence in September of 2023 to truly start building this movement, and it just so happened to be homecoming week at BCHS, the perfect time for an alumni to come home. I can't believe I grew up here. I've been saying that since I got here. It's like, it's just, it's very small. European Wax Center, wow, that's a big deal for me. That would have been a real game changer in high school. So you're gonna make a right up here, and then we're coming up on the high school, so it's gonna be on a right. It's Rebel Way now. Yikes! Oh, this street, the other street is still Sean Alexander, I think, but yeah, Rebel Drive. Oof. Wow, big signs. Main entrance to the high school. Ooh, what is this? This is the Performing Arts Center. What? We did not have this. The school must be so different inside. They gotta listen. Sean Alexander Way. For non-football people, Sean Alexander was a legendary NFL player for the Seattle Seahawks who graduated from Boone in the 90s. He's also a black man who played for a team in the South called the Rebels. His name being on one street of the school and Rebel Drive being the name of the other street is kind of the whole problem in a nutshell.
See kids in that window. I think that might be the band room.
Yeah, something like that. All of this was a parking lot. This is wild. There's money here now. I know that Sean Alexander had like a big hand in the athletic center because he like got them like sponsored by Nike for a season, like stuff like that. But this is honestly shocking. We've come to the history portion of this small town high school. So buckle up, because in a story where everyone is pointing to timeline, receipts, and intention, details matter. In 1954, they decided to consolidate Burlington, Florence, New Haven, and Hebron high schools into one new building, Boone County High School, which is why it's named after the county rather than the town. The building was erected in 1954 on what was then the edge of Florence. Boone County had a total of 515 students enrolled in the school that year, along with 18 teachers and Principal Chester Goodridge. The story goes like this. The students were allowed to vote on a mascot. After several options were shot down, such as the Boone County Bison or the Boone County Moonshiners, Principal Goodridge was fed up and called the students rebels. The movie, Rebel Without a Cause, was all the rage, and who wouldn't want to be James Dean smoking in that leather jacket? You know, the epitome of cool in 1955. It would be like if they were being formed today, they'd be the Boone County Wednesdays or the Boone County Barbies. Honestly, legit. But I digress. The story we've been told ends with the students choosing rebels as their mascot. Today, Boone County has more than 1,300 students enrolled, and it also turns 70 years old in 2024. And while we were in town, we knew that we'd need to deep dive into this. Possibly? Probably. Apocryphal story.
I was a lady rebel. Like, what does that even mean?
The Boone County Rebels will stay the Boone County Rebels with the image of...
It's right here in black and white in print. They might
bigger than a flag or mascot.
Anytime you're trying to mess with tradition, you have to be ready for serious backlash.
From Ninth Planet Audio, I'm Akilah Hughes, and this is Rebel Spirit, Episode 2, History Lessons. So we are at the Burlington Library. It's in Boone County. It's the main library for the area. We just got a really detailed tour of all of the local history info. So now we're just digging through archives of yearbooks and newspapers, and they have a lot. They have a lot of stuff. Got 20 pounds of yearbooks. These are 1951. These are other...
Those are pre...
Yeah, 53. I feel like 53 and 54 would be very helpful. All right, so this is 53. Oh, a black man. The only one I've ever seen. Is he black? Also, though, I'm curious if we can find anything about Rebel Without a Cause when it was first like in a newspaper anywhere around.
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
I doubt that there was an advertisement that they all saw and were like, we're obsessed with it.
Right.
Okay, I'm back to the first yearbook, 1955. And I'm just gonna read everything and look at all of the little handwritten notes. There's gotta be something, somewhere. There's nothing that would even slightly allude to the fact that they love Rebel Without a Cause. Somebody had to have written the story of this if it happened, right? Like, it just seems weird that, like, no one knows. That is stunning. This doesn't even mention it.
Rebel Without a Cause is this pretty seminal film when it came out in 1955. It was released soon after James Dean's tragic death. I think he was not even 25, and he died in a tragic automobile accident on a California freeway. And in the movie, they are drag racing and doing what teenagers do, reckless things.
Yeah. This is Dr. Emily Carmen, an associate professor of film and media studies at Chapman University. Her primary research focuses on classic Hollywood cinema.
It really was this statement at the time, especially with the director, Nicholas Ray, critiquing American conformity culture, conspicuous consumption. This is the great economic boom of the 50s after the scarcity of the Depression and the war years.
And this is a huge hit film, right? Like it takes over the country.
Yeah.
How do you then quantify its national effect?
Even if it wasn't digital like it is now, where you can, get shockwaves around the world, there was still a big publicity campaign. So when a film, and when James Dean died, that's still national news, international.
Right.
News. So there would still be a huge awareness, unless the town really had limited access to national publications. But I still feel like James Dean dying would get front page news in a local paper.
Okay, so from what we can sleuth, presuming people in Florence had access to the Cincinnati Times-Star newspaper, the October 25th, 1955 issue says that it is opening Wednesday at the RKO Palace in Cincinnati. That was opening weekend across the country, and there's a big picture of James Dean included with the description. So we can agree, the movie was a big deal. But it wasn't until months later, January 29th and 30th, 1956, that Rebel Without a Cause came to Florence, where it played the Florence Drive-In. Yes, the drive-in in January. That previous fall, they announced the introduction of electric in-car heaters so that, and I quote, patrons may now enjoy living room comfort even in sub-zero weather. For those that weren't interested in freezing their cars, Rebel Without a Cause also played that week indoors at the Gaiety Theater in nearby Erlanger. Okay, so between the two theaters, Rebel Without a Cause played in the area for a total of 3 days in late January. Both screened on Sunday and Monday, the 29th and 30th. The Gaiety also had it on the 31st. That's it. If you miss seeing it, the VCR wouldn't be in living rooms for another 30 years.
I teach a class on 1950s cinema and culture, and I remember taking classes in literature and culture in 1950s when I was a student. And I think that the 50s was a really tumultuous decade, even though it's remembered as this, decade of
super chill.
Leave it to Beaver. Yeah, exactly.
Here's just some other important dates while we're in the 50s. The decision on Brown versus Board of Education was issued on May 17th, 1954. On May 31st, 1955, the Supreme Court dropped the sequel, Brown 2, demanding the implementation of desegregation with all deliberate speed. Because as always, we need to remind folks about equality. September 4th, 1957 was the day the Little Rock nine black students attempted to enroll at Little Rock Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. President Dwight D. Eisenhower had to send federal troops to make sure these little kids could attend school without facing violence from racist adults. One last one. September 12th, 1958. The Supreme Court ruled on Cooper versus Aaron, which prohibited state laws from undermining the Supreme Court's authority. All right, so the 1950s was a lot more than soda shops and leather jackets, and we're going to get into that in a lot more detail in a minute. But let's get back to Rebel Without a Cause, because here we are, talking to one of the leading authorities of classic cinema. Surely she's heard of a high school sports team naming themselves after this seminal film, right?
No, I've not. So that was intriguing when I got your email request. I was like, I've never heard that. Yeah, I mean, if you want to be, I think it's cool to be the Rebels from Rebel Without a Cause, but the mascot needs to be like a cool red jacket and blue jeans, right?
Yeah, like slicked back hair, white tee, has a car, not riding a horse. Like, absolutely.
The imagery just does not add up to that.
Okay, so Dr. Carmen may have never heard of a high school team naming themselves after Rebel Without a Cause, but that's the story we've been told over and over and over again. It's that these kids just loved Jimmy Dean so much that they named the team after him. And it's not only the Boone County Rebels. Remember, according to an email that we got from Barbara Brady, which I will read again because I'm petty, there are more than 100 high schools across the country with the name Rebels, many of whom also took the name from the movie at the time. This isn't just a story. It is the official line of the Boone County School District. So certainly this has to match up to the relevant facts, right? So this issue is October 7th, 1954. It's that Thursday. And they have an article. Basic local news. Amount of plant food and fertilizer is important, says the county agent. Boone County High School. The athletic teams were dubbed the Rebels by the student body in a recent school-wide vote conducted by the journalism class. The Rebel football team made its first home appearance on the new Boone County High School field Thursday night, September 30th. 12 girls led the Rebel cheering section. It's right here in black and white in print. In 1954. So, they lying. They're lying. The first year of Boone County High School was from September 7th, 1954 to the first graduation on May 20th, 1955. Friends, they were still filming Rebel Without a Cause when that graduation took place. They were called the Rebels a year before the movie was released. So no, they are not named after Rebel Without a Cause. Representatives for the education system in Boone County, Kentucky are simply lying. It's also just funny that all it took was coming to the library. And we figured it out. In 5 minutes. There's no interrogating what people are told here. It's just you were told and they pass it down. And that's good enough. When we return, we're going to go from Brown versus Board to Brown versus everybody, the 1960s. We'll be right back. This is 64. Whoa. I feel like this is like, as the school's integrating, allegedly, we'll start to see the pushback. JFK visited Boone County during his campaign. Now, why did JFK come here? 69's yearbook. There's no mention of JFK dying? Okay, so it's not explicitly racist yet.
No, there we are.
Oh, yeah. There's the big Confederate flag at the football game, 1968. And no one's acting like it's a big deal. It's like a sea of young white kids in the 60s. They're like all standing at this gate watching the football game, but flung over the gate that they're like standing at is a huge Confederate flag. It spans like 8 kids, and there's a kid that's probably 5 standing right there with it, touching it. So it seems like it's definitely just, it doesn't seem like it's not normal at all. Like nothing's pointing it out. Mr. Jerry Johnson serves as judge for the mock trial. So it's a mock trial, and they've got a Confederate flag. And the judge has it on his hat too. Yeah, that's sickening. The sinister thing is like they're not thinking about it. There's no black people around. And like even still they're so subjugated in society, it's not like they have to care how they feel about it. So it's like they're just doing their thing. I mean, just seeing a yearbook like this where truly no one is of color, it's like, it's kind of shocking.
Much of this memory of the Confederacy doesn't develop during the Civil War. Even the Confederate flag as we know it, the red flag with the stars and bars, that's a flag that wasn't as popular whenever it comes to the memory of the Confederacy until the 1960s, as it developed in opposition to the Civil Rights Movement.
Dr. Brandon Rinder is an assistant professor of history at the University of Utah, but he was raised in, I'm sure the gorgeous accent gives it away, Kentucky.
I grew up in Kentucky, a state that didn't secede from the Union, but it has more Confederate monuments and memorials in the state than it does Union monuments and memorials.
We wanted to talk to Brandon because as a Kentuckian and as a historian who specializes in Black life in post-war America, he could tell us more about what the mid-1950s was like for Black kids in northern Kentucky.
For the most part, people resisted desegregation as much as they could. There were schools that would close down in order to avoid desegregation. In some cases, they would allow a very minimal number of Black students into white schools to argue that they had desegregated when really they hadn't. In most cases, it took roughly 10 to 15 years for most schools to actually desegregate according to federal standards. Whenever you consider all of the housing inequality within major cities, the amount of poverty, in many cases, this forced a lot of Black residents in these cities to areas outside of the cities. And so if I had to guess, there are probably a lot of Black Southerners that might have moved north and ended up in Cincinnati, but then because of the conditions within those cities, had to find cheaper housing options, had to find more livable conditions just outside of that city. And so it could be in places like Covington or in places like Florence.
Black people have been coming to the northern Kentucky region for a long time. Cincinnati was a key hub in the 19th century Underground Railroad because the Ohio River provided a crucial passage to freedom in the north. Of course, with Black migration comes anti-Black violence.
Here, the racial violence started in an open, public way, started right after the Civil War. And that was just like this campaign of terror that started in 1866.
This is Hillary Delaney of Boone County Public Libraries and a Boone County High School alumna. She helms the Borderlands Archive and History Center, where her focus is on African American history in Boone County, Kentucky.
Returning Confederate soldiers were terrorizing and beating people and saying, "You got to get out or we'll kill you."
That campaign of terror was based at a tavern in nearby Walton, Kentucky, where the former Confederate soldiers set up shop. They were responsible for 8 lynchings in a 10-year period from 1876 through 1885. Names of 4 of their 8 victims are part of the lynching memorial at the National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery, Alabama. Racial violence continued in the area for decades.
In 1917, somehow the coroner was on site when people had chased this man that they thought stole from someone, and they were threatening to lynch him, and he was in a tree, literally in a tree, trying to get away from them. Wow. And this coroner, using sort of a sense of humor approach to talk him down. Oh, come on now, boys, like I don't want to work today, so come on, dark.
Yeah, like a coroner says that. It's pretty bleak.
Glad handing him and all that, but he saved the guy's life. But that would have been, just a generation before.
This was a generation before Boone County High School opened in 1954. In the first class of BCHS, the children of people very much alive in 1917 named their team after Rebel Without a Cause before it had even been filmed? Unless rebel really meant something else.
The term rebel, the historical context of the term rebel is so interesting because, during the Civil War and then immediately after the war, Southerners, Confederate sympathizers referred to the war as the War of Northern Aggression. That it wasn't the South's fault that the Civil War happened, it was the North's fault. Northerners referred to it as the War of Southern Rebellion. Rebel actually changes immediately after the Civil War from a symbol of shame as people who caused the Civil War to more of a point of pride. And so we see this in high school mascots. Most notably, we can see this in the state of Mississippi, where the University of Mississippi, Ole Miss, their mascot is also the rebel. The Vice President of the Confederacy, Alexander Stephens, gave a cornerstone speech saying that slavery and white supremacy were the cornerstone of Southern society. But then immediately after the Civil War, he writes a book explaining that his cornerstone speech wasn't exactly interpreted the way that he meant it. He says that the Civil War wasn't about slavery or white supremacy. It was about the idea of states' rights.
To own slaves.
Exactly.
I want to break out of the interview for just a moment because when Dr. Rinder brought up the cornerstone speech, I was intrigued. Here was the VP of the Confederacy spelling out before the start of the Civil War what he and the Confederacy saw as the reasoning. And it is damning.
The Constitution, it is true, secured every essential guarantee to the institution while it should last, and hence no argument can be justly urged against the constitutional guarantees thus secured, because of the common sentiment of the day. Those ideas, however, were fundamentally wrong. They rested upon the assumption of the equality of races. This was an error. It was a sandy foundation, and the government built upon it fell when the storm came and the wind blew. Our new government is founded upon exactly the opposite idea. Its foundations are laid. Its cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery's subordination to the superior race is his natural and normal condition.
I cannot imagine a worse sentiment. And yet, it's an uphill battle to change the team name. Anyway, back to Dr. Brandon Rinder.
Well, a lot of people that want to talk to me about this as a history professor and say that, people are erasing history by taking these statues down or by removing Confederate flags. And I'm like, no, actually, what this is doing is in many ways recovering the true history of what's happened here. Mm-hmm. And so what's happened is that over time, it's been revised so much that we've taken all of the negative elements out of something like the term rebel or something like a Confederate statue. But really what we're doing is actually giving this more history, not the history that we're comfortable with, but maybe the history that makes us a little bit uncomfortable.
History is uncomfortable. Let's just say it. A lot of bad things happened in the past. The history of America is not pretty. It's the history of chattel slavery and of native genocide and the internment of Japanese Americans. To whitewash literally our history is to do it a disservice.
I've had, really honestly, some white people say to me, and this was not in Boone County, this is in Henderson County. I did a program, and this woman said, well, why do you even do this? First, I didn't know. I was sort of like meaning
Yeah.
And so
like today or like generally.
My answer is, I work in local history, and this is local history. And if we decided in a rural community that we were only going to do the history of the people who farmed tobacco and not the people who grew corn, we just leave them out, pretend like it didn't exist and there was no corn in the first place. And that's really dumbing it down, but that's exactly what I said.
Exactly. I mean, sometimes you have to.
When we have tours, there's always someone who says, well, my family had slaves, but they were like family, really. And then I say, well, if you owned your family and they didn't have any autonomy and they couldn't leave, then it would be like family. But no, I always say something like, aren't you glad that we know better now?
But do we know better now? I mean, really? If we were in such denial about that past that we'd make up a fairy tale about how the team became the rebels because of James Dean and not blatantly from Confederate soldiers who waged a war of terror across this very region, what have we actually learned? I think a lot about the first Black students at my high school and what it must have been like to walk those halls.
I think the first couple of years that Boone County, when it was integrated, of the people that stayed in the county, the families that stayed in the county, they stayed very low key, I think. Yeah. Right?
They're just like, put your head down, go to school. We're going to get out of here as soon as possible.
Survival, yeah.
Yeah. Unlike the story of Ruby Bridges or the Little Rock Nine, the earliest African-American teachers and students at Boone County are quiet whispers in newspapers and yearbooks. It's difficult to tell how open Boone County was to integrating. A 1955 article specifically mentions that the, quote, reason for the year's grace on integration of graded schools was to give the board time to work out a solution for the employment of Wallace Strader, Negro teacher. Another article in the fall of 1955 mentions, quote, 2 Negroes are reported at the Boone County High School in Florence. Looking at the 1956 yearbook, we can see a face or two that pop out from the crowd. Sophomore Alice Sanders, freshman Shirley Frazier, freshman Lawrence Webb. In the 1957 yearbook, it's a couple of totally different Black students than the previous year. Oh, and by the way, the 1957 yearbook has a rearing horse with a Confederate soldier, saber in hand, on the cover. You remember that scene in Rebel Without a Cause where James Dean was on a horse with a saber, right? But the first Black graduate from Boone wasn't until 1959. He was there for just 2 years. The first Black teacher who the board apparently needed a year to figure out what to do with, Wallace Strader, was the son of an enslaved man and attended both Kentucky State College and Wilberforce University. He then taught at the Burlington Colored School and even served as its principal until the schools consolidated with the other county schools in 1954. He then became the BCHS assistant librarian. As head librarians come and go over the years, Mr. Strader is always the assistant until his retirement in 1966. There's a very nice Black History Month write-up about him in the Boone County High School student newspaper, still, as of 2024, named The Rebellion, as in the War of Southern Rebellion. I want to bring it back to Shirley Frazier, one of the first students to integrate Boone County High School. The last name Frazier is local to this part of northern Kentucky. Joel Frazier was a slave owner over in Union, just a few miles south of Florence. One of his slaves, named John Frazier, was the grandfather of Shirley. She was one of the first Black students at a school built 8 miles from where her grandfather lived in bondage. And seeing as 36% of all white families owned slaves before the Civil War in Boone County, specifically, Shirley was definitely going to school with the descendants of slaveholders. Shirley Frazier passed away in 2020, at the age of 80. Her grandparents were born slaves, and she died a few years ago. What I'm getting at here is that this is recent history. What we call history was someone else's present, and we are living through history every day, the knowledge of which has always inspired me to change it. More on changing history after the break.
The woman who's sitting down right now in that blue shirt had a little box of pins, and the little girl in purple just took one of the pins, and they are rainbow heart pins.
Okay, nice. So it must be
something's up.
Yeah, and she's got one on. They're giving them out.
Yeah.
I'll take one, hell yeah. The kids are all right.
Welcome. It's my pleasure to welcome everybody to this new board meeting of the school year. I'd like to say that this school year has started off really strongly.
We decided to attend a school board meeting. Not exactly incognito, but not there to make waves or bring up biscuits or rebels just yet. We were there to learn about what's going on at the school and how the decision-making bodies work. But we unexpectedly showed up to a meeting that planned to address Bill SB 150.
Senate Bill 150 will become law. Today in Frankfurt, Republican lawmakers in both chambers overturned Governor Andy Beshear's veto of a bill critics see as a bill being against transgender youth, as it bans gender-affirming care for minors and sets school policies on bathroom use, students' preferred pronouns, and teaching sexual identity.
Once we clued into what was unraveling right in front of us, we anticipated a lot of ugly and frankly hateful remarks.
150 is the law, and we have to follow the law, and that's sometimes hard for the community to understand. But we take an.
I mean, this place isn't exactly a stronghold of progressive thinking, but what actually went down shocked the hell out of me.
I'd like to speak to you today about SB 150. I would like to discuss the emotional and physical pain that being misgendered caused me.
I'm also here to talk about SB 150. I am here tonight because I'm a proud queer Kentuckian and because I care deeply about LGBTQ plus students and families in Boone County schools.
SB 150 is unconstitutional and will be struck down in court.
I come today about SB 150. I hope in your hearts that most of you believe that it's wrong.
Hello, my name is Amber Hoffman. I've actually reached out to you guys personally. Only one of you responded back to me. So instead of taking the time to speak to you, I'm going to take this opportunity to speak to the educators and administrators that I know are listening to this and that are currently scared of the implementation of SB 150 in Boone County school districts. So this is a guide to Kentucky Senate Bill SB 150. SB 150 does not require schools to out LGBTQ students. It actually prohibits the Kentucky Department of Education from requiring schools to keep information private from parents. It does not require the removal of pride flags or safe space stickers. It says nothing at all related to these items.
After the meeting, well, after the public comment section and before they started getting into budget details, we stepped outside and there they were.
Come to us, change things in Kentucky. Hey, just remember what we did a year ago in our election.
Most of the speakers against SB 150 huddled together in the warm, dark night, hashing out the next moves.
You guys came in right in the middle of our culture war. What do you know? Several of us.
They were strategizing on how to transform this not-so-welcoming place where I grew up into something better. It hit me in a way I wasn't expecting.
Hey, wait, are you from NPR?
No, but I was on Crooked Media.
Oh my
Did
God,
you listen
that's
to
what
What
I
a Day?
know. Yes. Okay,
What a
like,
Day.
I know that name. Okay. I hear it every day.
Yes,
oh
yes.
God. I'm fangirling.
Seeing these folks take on a giant much bigger than themselves, it lit a spark of hope. It made me think that maybe my own mission could catch fire in this town, and it was crystal clear now. If there's any hope for that, it's through Amber Hoffman.
I've been doing this work for a while, just like I don't know, I wouldn't say for fun. Like, I feel like it's like my obligation to participate in what is going on in my country and what's happening locally in my community. So I do it like as an obligation, I kind of think, but I love it.
Amber Hoffman is a district parent and member of the political nonprofit Northern Kentucky Initiative, which advocates for progressive issues and provides community support.
We have decided to take on Moms for Liberty. We have a chapter of Moms for Liberty that is operating in Boone County. There's 2 or 3 of them that have really been the face of pushing this kind of hateful legislation. And they've done a fantastic job of it. They've gotten behind State Representative Steve Rowlings, and he helps sponsor some of the more heinous bills that they've been trying to put through, SB 150, for example.
Moms for Liberty isn't just a Kentucky problem, but a nationwide organization, hell-bent on imposing their views on gender, sex, race, and history on school boards and state legislatures everywhere. But they're also a local problem, too. School board member Cindy Young is the vice president of the Boone County chapter of the Moms for Liberty. At least she was, before the chapter was dissolved because the chapter president was caught being racist. Shocking, I know. Trust me when I say this isn't the last you'll hear about this on the podcast, but for now, suffice it to say that the Moms for Liberty are a problem everywhere and also here, and they're a problem Amber Hoffman is working to combat.
So a couple years ago, pre-COVID, I started doing this thing where I would have what I was calling political parties at my house, where I would just invite people that I thought had progressive ideas. And I would be like, congregate, let's meet. Basic grassroots, like let's take it back to the garage and have these conversations.
Yeah.
Everyone here feels incredibly disconnected.
Yeah.
And it has been a labor of love in this area. And since I've been doing it now for, 5 or 6 years, anytime something like this would come up, we would just reach out. All of us would reach out to each other and be like, hey, did you hear this is happening? The actual people that control this place that have no idea what's going on, they have no clue how different it is on the ground now.
This is the old stomping grounds. They did add sidewalks. Shout out to the mayor. It only took my entire life, but I remember I would walk to a friend's house and there was never a sidewalk. Still no.
You can actually see they're putting the sidewalk in right there.
Yeah. Right.
That gravel is the sidewalk.
Yeah, and there's people walking on the dirt. All of this is different. Driving up Burlington Pike towards the high school, you pass a Spanish language church. A mosque is right across the street from BCHS. Amber's right. It is different on the ground. Now, coming to Florence, revisiting the school I went to and the streets that I grew up on, seeing the homecoming parade and the diversity of the kids that took part, whispering at the library as the staff helped every kind of person, seeing the crowd of people willing to stand up at the school board and speak truth to power, I saw just how different it really was. And yet, even as change moves to town, the shadow of history still looms over the region because people are too unwilling or too scared to face it. One of the places we'll be passing did change their name. It used to be, I think, Plantation Point. And, they were like, Ixnay. I don't know what this place is called up here, but this used to be a plantation apartment complex. And, I remember, the black quarterback used to live there, and I was like, you live at the plantation? Yeah, now it's Weaver Farm. As you can see, they're like, it's a farm, it's not a plantation. It's a farm. Some progress, I suppose. Seeing the changes in Florence and meeting people like Hillary at the library and Amber, I realized that not everyone is afraid of the past. That there are people who are willing to look clear-eyed at history and say the obvious but brave thing. That we don't have to be defined by it. That we can move beyond it to build better things for everyone. But it means being honest about it. And so I'll be honest now. The Boone County Rebels namesake does not come from Rebel Without a Cause. They were named the Rebels like hundreds of other high schools that took on the name Rebel in the iconography of the Confederacy in the 1950s and the 1960s as a response to desegregation. A whole lot of kids and administrators saw the change that was happening in their world and decided they would rather embrace the Confederacy than the black kids just trying to go to school. Truth is hard. History is ugly, but the future doesn't have to be. We can change. And friends, we're gonna do it. More than ever, I know it. Rebel Spirit is a production of Ninth Planet Audio in association with iHeart Podcasts. Reporting and writing by me, Akilah Hughes. I'm also an executive producer and the host. Produced by Dan Sinker. Edited by Josie Azam. Our assistant editor is Jennifer Dean. Music composed by Charlie Sun. Sound design and mixing by Josie Azam. Our production coordinator is Kyle Hinton. Our clearance coordinator is Anna Sonnenschein. Production accounting by Dilpreet Singh. Additional research support from Janice Dillard. Cornerstone speech voice performance by Hal Lublin. Special thanks to Jay Becker and the whole team at BLDG, the Florence Yalls, Amber Hoffman, and Leslie Chambers. Executive producers for Ninth Planet Audio are Elizabeth Bakewit and Jimmy Miller.